if I was starting today, I'm not really a fan of what I'm hearing now. I don't think, I think I would probably get into...
I definitely still would have been into jazz, and I love Latin, and I love funk. But the one thing I wish I had got into when I was young is...
I'm really conscious of the fact that the younger generations don't really see saxophone players anymore. If I'm honest, if I was going back and being 18 or 19 and starting a career now, I think I would want to be doing... G'day, it's Nigel here. Welcome back to the Sax School Online podcast. Today I'm joined by Joel Purnell and Fred Vigda from the Sax School Tutor team. How you doing, guys?
Great.
Awesome. So today we're kicking off the season 2 of the podcast with a fun topic. It's great to be back. And I thought this was a really interesting conversation for us to get started with. So here's the thing. Fred and Joel and myself, and all the rest of the tutors actually at Sax School, we've all been working professionally as sax players for decades. But let's face it, the world's very different today than when we first started our careers. So if we were going back and starting from scratch as performers and building a career today in 2025, would we do anything differently? I'll tell you what, there's 3 things I'm curious about actually. I'm wondering how we would choose the style that we like to play. And the second thing is, how would we approach our practicing and our learning? And would that be any different to what we did back in the day? And thirdly, if we were building a career today, well, what would we do differently for that? Fred, I think this is a bit of an interesting question because the world is very different today. But I'm curious about style, and I'd love to start the conversation with you because when I think about you, Fred, I always think about, funk, commercial playing, and all those years that you spent touring around the world with Average White Band. That's really the style that I think about for you. But if you were a young, let's say an 18-year-old in 2025, just discovering saxophone and wanting to get stuck in, do you think you'd still be drawn to funk, or would you be looking at something different?
Yeah, this is such a tough question for me because, funk is the thing that I've always gravitated towards, but I never practice it. I don't work on it. I work on playing jazz because jazz is so much harder and it informs the rest of my playing. But I came to jazz, bebop, whatever you want to call it, so late in my music career. I didn't even know what Charlie Parker was. Before my first exposure to Charlie Parker was Super Sax. I'm sure you guys remember Super Sax, right? Yep. It was a group of 5 studio musicians from LA who were playing transcribed solos. And my dad got me that before I ever had any exposure to Charlie Parker or anybody. I was listening to Sanborn and Tom Scott and those guys. The thing is now, if I was starting today, I'm not really a fan of what I'm hearing now of that type of music. I barely listen to that stuff now. I listen to the stuff that I always listen to more than anything else. And there's so much of it that I haven't listened to yet. So I think I would probably really dig into jazz and bebop, especially, I think, because that's the foundation of everything. And if you listen to the guys that I really like that play contemporary music, whatever you want to call it, some jazz, funk, whatever. Those guys are all, their playing is informed, the ones that I like, their playing is informed by bebop. So I think that's what I would do, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, why not? Rocking it old school, keeping to the roots and staying with that as your sort of guiding light, which is fantastic, actually. Joel, I'm curious to know what your answer is. But when I think of you, I think about Brecker. Like that's I love the way you can do all that stuff. You got that burning, intensity in your improvising. But would that be the thing that you'd be focused on if you were starting today? Because obviously when we were growing up, when we were young and impressionable, Brecker was the thing. I mean, it still is the thing, but it was so prominent then. And there's a lot of other stuff around now. So what about you, Joel?
Well, yeah, once again, it's an hard question. I mean, I totally agree with what Fred was saying. I was lucky because I actually got into the bop first. So I actually discovered Brecker quite late on. I was in my late teens, early 20s before I got there. And I got there chronologically. So I kind of done the groundwork that led to that. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have a chance. I wouldn't like to start with Brecker, put it that way. I don't think anyone had had a chance if that's your start point. But it's kind of other things. I mean, I definitely still would have been into jazz, and I love Latin, and I love funk. I still would have got into that, I'm sure. But the one thing I wish I had got into when I was younger, because it takes so long to study, is Indian improvisation. Without a doubt, I just find it absolutely fascinating. It's got that connection with the improvisation and the modes or ragas that jazz has. But the idea of the type of concerts that you can do with that type of music. I mean, some of the concerts are just like a 4-hour improvisation. And to some people, that might sound like hell. To me, that sounds like absolute bliss. I couldn't think of anything more prefer to do than just, develop an improvisation over 4 hours. I think it sounds great, but there's so much study involved in understanding the nuances of the cultural sounds and things like that. It's a lifetime's work, and I'm a bit long in the tooth for that now. So I think if, I'm still interested and I'll still have a go, but I'm never going to get where I want with that. I think you've got to fully commit, I think is the term that they'd use from that point of view. But yes, if I was starting again, Indian improvisation would be something I'd be getting into much earlier in life.
Well, I didn't see that answer coming, Joel. That's amazing. How interesting.
I was going to say Tom Scott. He talks about that in the masterclass he did for us, that he really got into that. And that's one of the things that really informs his rhythm and his time, which is amazing, is Indian music. And he played with Ravi Shankar and a bunch of other people.
Absolutely. When I was interviewing him, he was talking about studying tabla and that was when he's he's probably in his 20s, I guess, when he was doing that.
Yeah.
But how he was talking about how those rhythms that he learned from the tabla were so useful in his style of his playing, the accuracy as well, but also the rhythms. Yes, that's fascinating. Something I just know nothing about. Joel, you did that session with Jesse Bannister, who does Indian jazz, doesn't he?
Yeah, Indian improvisation. And he's done it. Well, when I was getting into bebop, he was getting into that. And he's formed his entire career based round that. He's done very well with it, but it's just constantly, even now, it's not the studying of how to play it, it's the studying of all the potential things that are in there, from the rhythms to the different ragas that are used, and the little nuances of tuning and stuff. It's just so kind of detailed. It's kind of right up my street, but I don't think I'd do it proper justice if I was to start in my 50s.
There you go. Well, if you're curious to check out that interview with Jesse Bannister, that's on the Sax School podcast, and you can see all the episodes over at saxschoolonline.com/podcast, or on the podcast platform that you're listening to us on today, or obviously as on YouTube as well. And same with the Tom Scott masterclass. There are some snippets of that on YouTube, but the main full masterclass is actually part of our Sax School membership, and you can go and check out the 14-day trial and join thousands of other learners with Sax School over at saxschoolonline.com. So that's very interesting. You guys make me feel a little bit like I'm taking the easy road, really. But
Go on, Nigel.
If I'm honest,
it's your turn. Your turn.
So let me tell you what I would do, because I did come through. My path is similar to both of you. It's somewhere in the middle, really. I didn't have a lot of jazz around me when I was younger, just because geographically where I was living up in the north of Australia. But I did have a passion for early jazz, early on, like in my early teens. But I also spent a lot of time studying classical saxophone, and then doing all the whole gamut, really. Discovering Brecker like you did, Joel. Just couldn't do it as well as you. But to be honest with you, if I was starting from scratch today, the thing that frustrates me with jazz, I love jazz. What frustrates me about it, though, is that the audience is small and it's dwindling, and that's annoying to me, really. The thing I love about styles like jazz house or the DJ sax stuff is that you can reach a really big audience, and I'm really conscious of the fact that the younger generations don't really see saxophone players anymore, apart from in these styles. So if I'm honest, if I was going back and being 18 or 19 and starting a career now, I think I would want to be doing those sort of styles that are reaching a really broad range of people. Still gives you a chance to, in my private practice, to study all that other stuff, but in my performing work, to get out and reach a lot of people. And I think there's a bunch of things that are really cool about that. The fact that you are reaching a bigger audience, the fact that there's a demand for it, and also I think the fact that you're spreading saxophone around and more people are getting influenced by it. So there you go. I feel a little bit not as you guys sound more serious than me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but that's what I would do. All right, so that's about style. So what about our approach to learning? Because I'm really conscious of the fact that learning has changed a lot. Obviously, we all work at Sax School. We're helping thousands of learners every day, and we're all about online learning for saxophone. But the three of us have learned in a very different way. So what about you, Joel? You actually teach at one of the best jazz conservatoires here in the UK. Would you still go back and go through the traditional route of learning at university?
Well, I have to put my learning at university in inverted commas, I'm afraid, because I just tended to stay at home and practice for 12 hours a day. I didn't show up a lot unless there was some playing involved. So it's what you do, whether you go through a university. The thing about universities is music university is it's like a taster menu. You get all these different kind of aspects chucked at you while you're there. You don't really delve very deeply into any of them because every musical subject's a lifetime of study. It's who you meet, and I think that's the really useful thing. These days, we've got, for example, in Sax School, we've got the community. There's other ways of meeting other like-minded musicians and keeping in touch. Back in my day and your day, Nigel, and your day, Fred, as well, it had to be done face to face. That's how you met people. So to me, that was still quite a valuable thing to do from that point of view. And I did my practice and got on with it from that point of view. But it's what I practiced I'd change. That's the thing that I'd change, with a bit of hindsight and just, because it's much more prevalent. You see it in Sax School, you see it on YouTube, and the importance of these subjects, just the basics. It's spending and committing some time, particularly when you're young and excitable and just getting into an instrument. You just want to play. All I did was practice like transcriptions that looked like spiders had run across the page with ink on the legs, I could barely hold the thing, and I was already practicing Sanborn and Parker solos, very, very badly, I imagine. I thought it was great at the time, but my parents probably would have disagreed, as anybody at my school had to listen to me every dinner time trying to do it. I just wish when I was younger I'd spent more time on those basic things, tone production, tuning, because they're all things that kind of came back and bit me at some point. And then, when I was actually able to play a lot better, I had to go back to these things that I'd kind of avoided. And I think if I'd just done that from the beginning, I think I would have been a better player quicker and more rounded and not so frustrated and tangenty. So that's the thing. I know now that I would focus on the basics, and we talk about it all the time in Sax School, and that everybody talks about warm-ups and stuff. It's just not something I was really aware of, but I am now, and that's what I do.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess we're having this conversation based on the idea that we would be 18 years old knowing all the stuff we know now, right? So a lot of those things come from maturity, and it depends on where you are in your life when you get to that point where you're studying at university. And I think possibly, apart from, and I completely agree with you, by the way, that university is about connections, but it's also an opportunity. Part of what university is about, it's an opportunity for you to take your time to evolve as a human and grow and mature, right? And grow into this thing and be guided along the way. It's an expensive way to do that, but yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing, though. People talk about this now. It's out there a lot more. It just wasn't something that was mentioned to me much, even at university. I wasn't told to do long tones. It was mentioned now and again, but now you see it all the time. We talk about it in Sax School. You see it all over the show, how important that is. I just wish someone had told me back then. But now with
There you go.
hindsight. Now I know. Now I know.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I loved going off to study, and the time when I did go down to the Big Smoke and study at a fancy conservatorium was an eye-opening experience, just because it was the first time I'd been in a big city and around actual real musicians, professional people, and all that sort of stuff. But if I was going at it today, I'm not sure that I would want to focus on just studying at university, because I actually think there's so much value in learning on the job, getting out and actually doing the doing, going out and playing and touring. And obviously it's difficult to say that, if you imagine that you're 18 and you didn't have the same sort of experience, knowledge and all that sort of stuff that you do now. But I think I wasted a lot of time over practicing and delaying getting out and actually doing the thing, getting out and doing the gigs. And there's so much merit in going out and actually doing the performing, because you learn stuff along the way. So it took me till my mid-20s really before I was out and really busy gigging, and I got busier and busier and busier, and I learned so much faster than when I was just grinding away in the practice room for 6 or 7 hours a day. So I think that's the thing that I would do different, is I would focus more on performing and learning practically, as opposed to just getting a million hours of practice done. What about you, Fred? What would you do different? Because actually your whole trajectory is quite different to Joel.
I'm the exact opposite of both of you guys, I think, because was talking about this the other day, and that I don't think I've ever practiced 8 hours in my life. I don't mean collectively. I just mean in total, at one time. But yeah, I wasted. We talked about this in the Get to Know Fred podcast, and I wasted so much time in college. I got all the stuff that Nigel, especially that you were talking about, except that you were looking for, because I didn't practice. Here's the other thing is, the teachers that I had, the saxophone teachers that I had in university, were not on the same wavelength as I was. I was the one that was bringing. I talked about this with one of my buddies, Chris, a lot, because we went to school together, and he's a saxophone player as well. I was into Brecker at that point. I couldn't play any of it. I would transcribe some of that stuff, and I would bring it into my teacher, and I would say, "Hey, check this out." And he was so old school. This is the quote that I use, that my friend and we always throw this out. He said to me, "Oh, that's just Charlie Parker with fourths and pentatonics thrown in." And then I was like flabbergasted by that. I wasn't to learn that kind of stuff, but because we weren't on the same wavelength, and we didn't have a routine and a method. It was a waste of time. And, I never really practiced the fundamentals. We talked about this in that podcast. I don't think I started doing really doing the work until, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and it's for Joel, I shudder to think what you would sound like if you had practiced more, or spent more time on the foundations, because you're a monster. So what would happen if you? I don't understand that. But I wish that I had developed a routine and spent time transcribing and all that stuff. I was out there playing. Wasn't doing a great job at it, but I was out there working all the time, but I was playing, but not practicing. And,
wow. That's really fascinating. See, that's why I thought it'd be a good conversation today, because how fascinating. You and I and Joel, we all have different experiences, and actually the things that we want, if we had opportunity to do it again, would be different. But perhaps we could learn from each other, right? Like the things that you missed in your development, Fred, the things that I wish that I had in my development. But, you end up in different places, don't you? It's fascinating.
I've said this before, but, we're all defined by our limitations. I play the way I do because of, and am I hitting the wall? Constantly hitting the wall. But, we are Joel, who we are at this point. And
Joel plays the way he is because he's an alien. He's superhuman.
Now,
when are you going to tell us, Joel? Just come clean.
Honestly.
Did neither of you guys came from a musical family, right? Was anybody in your family? See,
No.
and that's the thing is I was exposed to it at a very early age because my dad was a bass player and he had a band. They would rehearse in the basement. I was into this, from the time I started when I was 10, but if it's so depressing to me to think about if I had actually spent the time working on it, and spending time on the fundamentals. And nobody told me, but I didn't practice long tones till I went to Marini. When I went to Lou Marini, and that was like a little at a high school, he was the one that said, hey, gave me the top tones for saxophone book and got me into that stuff. But I had already been playing, that was I was 18. I already been playing for 8-9 years at that point. And I just now everybody, you're getting that stuff right away. So
that's true.
And also you have to, and Joel touched on this a little bit, the fact that we have so much technology now that, I started playing probably a little sooner than you guys because I'm older, right when the Aebersold records came out. Before that, we didn't have any of that stuff. We had like Music -1, which had like these real corny arrangements of these, real corny tunes. But then I remember, when Lou was hooked up with James Aebersold, so he would have all those Aebersolds and we would, play with them and stuff like that. But that was, I went years without having that. Now you have that stuff right away. And even more stuff. I mean, we're going to be talking that in another podcast about, the gadgets and all the stuff that we have at our disposal now. And it's just, it changes the whole landscape.
Yeah, I remember one of the teachers when I was at uni. He had the Aebersold 251 backing track on tape, and it was like gold dust in that building. If you got your hands on that, you were away. So I remember when there was nothing at all. All my practice before I started playing when I was about 14. So first 5 years there was no backing. I had a Casio keyboard with a bad bossa nova sound, if that counts. I used to stick stuff into that and play along with that. But that was about it. But it is a really interesting conversation because even if we'd done these things that we're all talking about, we would have ended up totally different players, and maybe we wouldn't. It's hard. It's hard.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you, Fred, is that you sound a little bit disgruntled about this, the path that you had. But the reality is, by doing the playing when you were younger, you had all these opportunities that are completely mind-blowing to me. The people that you were playing with, the opportunities that you had to meet, be connected with people is something that it was just an impossibility for me when I was the same age, when I was 18, 19, 20, just geographically where I was and because of the limited number of connections that I had in comparison to you. So there's flips and, swings and roundabouts to it, isn't there?
But that's what frustrates me is that I had all those opportunities, and if I only had the ability to go with it, I would be much farther along, generally than I am or than I was or whatever.
You didn't do too bad, Fred. Let's be honest. You didn't do too bad. All right. So what about the third aspect then? So we've spoken about style, and we've spoken about approach to learning. What about if we were setting off to try and build a career as a saxophone player? In 2025, you're 18 years old, you still got a good full head of hair. Oh, imagine those days.
Yes.
But you're starting, going out and building a career. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, the options seemed quite limited when I was that age because it was the era of record contracts and, all those gatekeepers that made it quite difficult. Obviously, there's the networking, meeting other musicians and getting out on the ground gigging. But if you had aspirations to think even bigger than that, it was quite a difficult, big step, particularly if you weren't living in New York or Los Angeles or London. So, I know what I'd do. Should I go first?
Yes, you go first, Nigel.
Okay, because the thing is, like you guys were saying about the amount of technology we've got available these days, to me, it's a no-brainer. If any young musician getting started today has to be responsible for building their own career themselves and building their own audience. And it's a wonderful opportunity that everybody has, whether you live in New York or Los Angeles or London, or whether you live in, the far reaches of some remote part of Australia. As long as you've got an internet connection, you can reach an audience. So for me, if I was starting out now, I'd definitely be doubling down on building that social presence, getting my music out and building my own audience and taking control of it myself. So I think it's a golden age of that. As opposed to the route that I went back in the day, which was get the best skills you can possibly have and get a well-rounded experience playing in lots of different situations and just make as many contacts as you can and work your way through, which was the obvious route to me. What about you, Fred? Have you got any ideas on what you would do differently?
This question was the one that really got me because I had a good career. I say had because, the 28 more than half of my life was spent on the road with a band that I grew up listening to. So I'm extremely lucky. And I don't know if I could have done any better with my abilities as they were. And I think about now how, people growing up, it's just automatic that you're already doing your Instagram and your all that other stuff. That in itself is a full-time job. And I wonder because I tend to go down a rabbit hole with that kind of stuff, and it takes away time that I should be spending getting my playing together. So that's a really tough. I'm glad that I grew up when I did, because if I had to do everything that I'm doing now, plus develop a career with social media, guys it's tough.
You didn't even have time to practice your long tones, did you? Let alone post on Instagram.
Yeah.
What about you, Joel?
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts on how you approach?
Yeah, well,
the whole thing of building a
obviously
career?
the social media side of thing is super important these days, but I'm kind of in between the two of you from that point of view. I totally agree with both of you. If you like, you need to have it these days, and at the conservatoire where I teach, it's literally a lesson, on how to engage with that kind of stuff, because that's part of the business now. However, I totally agree, and one of the reasons why I left all social media, in fact, about 7 or 8 years ago, is because it's such a massive distraction, and it distracted me from playing and practicing, and suddenly I felt I had to be doing something that I wasn't trained to do, and what was suddenly expected of me from venues and things like that. It was always like, okay, we'll put it on your social media. And I used to think to myself, isn't that their job? Isn't that a venue's job? I think I once said to a venue, "Are you familiar with posters?" I think was one of his statements, because they just didn't seem to know how to do their job anymore. So what I'd say with social media is 100% you need a social media presence. Find somebody that enjoys doing it that'll do it for you. I think would be the ideal combination. Somebody that's into the music, is happy to come along to all your gigs for free, and will market you in that way would probably be the ideal solution. I think the other thing as well, just going back to venues, is, and maybe this is a bit of hindsight, but I think it's also just an important thing. It's really easy when you're young to feel like venues are doing you a favour by letting you play at their venue, but that venue wouldn't exist without the musicians playing there at the same time. We're both as reliant on each other, from that point of view. And I think I'd be a bit less diminutive when it came to pushing myself to get gigs, and what I took from the venues, and what I give up to them, over time. I'd just be a bit stronger. And I think people are these days, because they can back themselves up with a social media presence and say, look,
100%.
you want me to play at your venue, rather than please, can I play at your venue? And then I think the big thing for me personally would be stagecraft, because I'm dreadful at it. I can waffle on all day, as you both know, and I am doing now. But get me on a stage and I can do my Indian improvisation for 4 hours, but I've got nothing to say in between it. I go completely blank. I'm terrible at it. It's like that tune was a fast one, and now I'm going to do a slow one. I can't even remember the name of the tune that I've just done. So I'd definitely like to have worked on that side of things. You know, I took a bit of a Miles Davis approach when I was younger. That was too cool to have to talk to anybody. But now I kind of regret that because I realise how important it is to engage with your audience. So there you go, a bit of an eclectic answer.
No, very interesting though, very interesting. And just to wrap up, I think it's a really interesting point that you made about the relationship between venues and artists these days, which, like you alluded to, ties in to the whole social media thing. Because I think these days it's the responsibility of the artist to build an audience. And guess what? Venues need audiences. So at the end of the day, I think the wonderful thing about the way the world is these days for musicians is you've got the opportunity to take control of that and actually build an audience around what you're doing. And that audience, that's the thing that's going to carry your career through, as opposed to when I was doing things back in the day, it was really about, well, who can I play with this band? Can I do this show? Can I be involved with this project? Maybe it's just 'cause I'm a bit more mature now, a bit more experienced with business and everything, but I would definitely be, and I think this is what young musicians need to do. I'd be grabbing the mantle and saying, right, this is my idea, and this is the way I think the music should sound, and I'm going to build my audience around that. And I think there's just so many benefits in that, not least of which is that venues actually want to talk to you. Anywho, really interesting conversation. I hope you listening have found that interesting. I'd love to know where you're up to with your musical journey too. So you're always welcome to send us over a message or leave us a comment. And we've got a wonderful season of episodes planned for you, actually, for our second season of the Sax School Online podcast. So I'd love to be sharing it with you. So don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you like to listen to. If you want to revisit any of the episodes, including this one, you can get the full transcription over at saxschoolonline.com. And if you're feeling saxschoolonline.com/podcast, I should say. And by the way, if you're feeling particularly generous, it'd be awesome if you could give us a 5-star review, or maybe even share this episode with a friend who you think might appreciate it. But for now, keep practicing hard, and we'll catch you next time. See you later.
See you later.